Well, I hope you're all ready for a bit of FM nostalgia this Sunday evening because an old addiction has resurfaced and it comes from the New Year update we did about a month or so ago, where we talked about our plans for the rest of 2024. And one of the things I said I wanted to do later in the year, just before the next FM, is given the situation with Luton Town, my club in real life this year, the focus we've had with them on the podcast and of course on Twitch with their debut Premier League season, is I wanted to go back to the rough times. And as part of that, I was planning to do a little series, which I'm still going to do, with FM09 and Luton Town, because those of you who have got any footballing knowledge of the lower leagues will know that was the -30 season, the infamous one. However, as part of that, over the last month or so, I've been getting back to grips with the game, doing a little save here and there, just dabbling to see how we get on. And I've got addicted to it. I'm nearly 2 seasons in now. And I thought as part of that, because it's an FM channel and I'm playing a lot of an FM game, I thought I'd give you a bit of an update from it. So what I'm going to do on occasional Sundays when I get to the end of each season, it's not going to be every week, is I'm going to do a little recap video to show how my year's going in a certain FM save that I'm doing. And of course, we'll go and look at that in a bit more detail at a minute. You'll get your clues from the title, of course. And in addition to that, if you want a little bit more detail about my thought process and how things are working behind the scenes, I'm also going to do a blog update the following day, which you'll be able to find a link to in the description below. And that will give you a bit more detail of how the season's gone and things we've done. So between it, you'll get almost a full update of an annual review. So hopefully you're looking forward to that. If you haven't seen it from the title, then yes, I've gone back to an old save I used to love in FM09, and it's in Scottish football and a Scottish Premier League. It is Hamilton Academical. Now, those of you who are big English football fans and big Scottish football fans will know that it was an important year for Hamilton. Far from the struggles of Scottish League One for them now, it was the James Mack era. James McCarthy and James MacArthur, two players that went on to make a big imprint in the Premier League and a big imprint on international football, are players that were starring through the Hamilton Academy at that time in FM. There were also a few other familiar names in there. Notable manager now, Alex Neil, and some very good young players such as James Gibson, Brian Easton and Richard Offiong, who didn't quite reach the same heights outside of the FM world. So what I'm going to do today is give you a brief introduction to the club at the start of the game, and I'm going to review Season 1, and then when we get to it in a few weeks' time, we'll review Season 2, and we'll put it occasionally in this Sunday slot. So if you're looking forward to it, please do chuck a thumbs up on the video. I hope that you're going to enjoy this bit of nostalgia. And of course, it will be a nice warm up for our regular series at the end of this FM cycle, where we go back and do the -30 season, hopefully after Luton have survived in real life in the Premier League, just as we did, just about, on Twitch. So let's go over to FM09 and into the first day at the job at Hamilton, and see what the squad and everything looks like. Because, as well as a very different user interface, Hamilton were a club that were still expected to be near the bottom in FM09 and were up against a better era of Scottish football, I think you would say, in terms of the overall standard of player in the league, with a lot of quality youngsters across the board. Now, what I'm going to do is take you through the expectations for the season, of course the squad that we inherit, and then we'll skip ahead a year and see how we've got on the first time around, because we've got to try and tie those young players down for the long term. And we've also got to try and make sure that we develop them, which is going to be hard 15 years in the past, because I've also got to avoid the temptation of just signing people that became great in real life and basing people on their FM careers rather than what they've done in the future as it would be in real life. So let's go and have a look at Hamilton Academical and the Scottish Premiership, because if we start with the league table, don't forget, this is an era where Rangers had just reached the Europa League final in 2008. Celtic were still starring in Champions League campaigns with the likes of Shinzuki Nakamura and Jan Vennegoor of Hesselink starring against Manchester United and the likes within the last few years. This is not an era of Scottish football that we are used to seeing. This is a Scottish football where there was a little bit more strength in depth through the division and a lot of young players, not to mention that in FM, players were rated a lot better generally in terms of having standout attributes, as we'll see in a minute with some of our squad. But also, what we forget about is the inflation of transfer fees. I mean, the average fee for a transfer during the first season in this save has been about £12,000. It really is a little different to what we see nowadays, and I think we forget that even the average Premier League transfer around this era was sort of 4, 5, 6 million, with just the odd standout one. It didn't really go bonkers until a couple of years later, because this was the season where the infamous Manchester City group took over. Robinho had just joined the club in this window. It was the time where football started to change, I guess. Many will say probably for the worse, but that's not for me to comment. Let's start by having a look at the expectation, because for Hamilton, it was not supposed to be a great year. They're expected to finish 11th. They've got a professional squad with Alex Neil as skipper. They have also got a little bit of loan debt and a tiny stadium, which obviously not much has changed in terms of the infrastructure of the club since, and it has gone on a downward spiral since that era of these stars coming through. It is in the top tier though, and we start with a very little budget because we have 10,000 to spend on transfers. You've got to get used to looking at different parts of the screen here. And 2,300 a week to spend on wages, a total bill of 15k a week. But with a lot of young players coming through, you can understand why perhaps there was a little bit less of a wage bill there. And to be fair, some of those old names popping up, I've had so many nostalgic moments in the first couple of years of this save. I mean, just look at this page of players that are realistic apparently for Hamilton, but we can't afford. Andrew Driver, a great young left winger at Hearts. Andy Dorman at St Mirren, I always used to try and sign in a championship. Just so many. Kieran McKenna's there. Of course, not a great player in this FM, but ends up becoming a very good manager now at Ipswich. But let's get back to the task in hand and look at the squads, because as well as having a threadbare staffing setup, an assistant manager who is actually a good player as well, but is not registered as a player and won't sign a contract as one, there aren't really that many other staff at the club. And the only one that's become a really recognisable name in the footballing world, Frankie McAvoy, who ended up at Preston for a time and ended up managing them in the end as well. He's not rated very well, so we're not going to get much out of that. If we go and have a look at the squad though, we've got a Hamilton side with a lot of talent in it. If we start with the under-19s and we get back to the old reports up here, we've got a few players for the future who you'll remember the names of, who have gone on to have decent careers in some cases as well. The likes of Ali Crawford, Grant Gillespie, and Jordan Kirkpatrick, well rated as well. And then moving up towards the reserves and the senior team, a number of players that we're going to rely on. So firstly, in the reserves for some reason is James Gibson, who's one of the best young players at the club. So he's going to get promoted. And there's a real depth for strikers here, which is not ideal given the formation we'll probably have to play for our best 11. So Kenny and Derek Lar will get into the senior squad just for now. We'll start loaning other people out in the future. But I just wanted to come to this screen to show you what we had to start with. I also forgot to mention the old confidence screen. God, does anyone remember these days? If you've only joined the FM cycle in recent years, this will look so alien to you. Such a simple time where there weren't 1,000 screens. This was it, basically, in the game. Let's have a look at the two goalkeepers we start with. Thomas Cherney on loan from Sigma. Now, here's a goalkeeper that sort of accentuates my earlier point about back in the old FMs, there were a lot more dramatic attributes where people would have 4s and 5s in certain areas, but then 19s and 20s in others. So, for example, Cherney has got 20 perfect reflexes, 17 positioning, 16 agility, that then has got real weaknesses with the likes of kicking and first touch and distribution. But overall, for our level, a very good goalkeeper. And despite being worth big money, has got a transfer future fee of 50 grand agreed as part of the loan. We'll have to sell if we want to be able to afford that before he goes back. Here's the first choice goalkeeper with Sean Murdoch as a backup. In defence, there is Trent McLenaghan, a right back who's also an Australian youth international. Very decent player at this level. But I've already got a target to replace him, so he'd probably be my backup if all goes to plan. Jordan McMillan is on loan from Rangers. Not as good as the wages he's getting. So someone we'd probably try and send back and terminate the loan of, which you can't see behind my head. In fact, let me move myself to the right of the screen. There we go. That makes it easier to see the key menus there. So we terminate the loan as soon as we get the replacement in that I'm going to try and spend my summer budget on. Into the rest of the defence, Brian Easton is one of the young stars at the club. Now, the problem is that him and James Gibson are both left back. So for Easton, he's probably going to have to play as a centre half, despite being fairly poor in the air, not the strongest. And Maybe having better attributes as a defensive left back. His someone will make work though, and he's got plenty of room for improvement at the age of 20. Let me just get these up with reports as well from the assistants. You can see he's actually got the potential that's up there with the likes of MacArthur and McCarthy, who we'll get to in a minute. Now, I've also just changed the metrics so I can see and understand how tall and that people are. I've been playing this save off camera on my laptop and I'm coming over to the PC for this. Here's a player I always remembered though, Martin Canning. Not the best mentally, but just a really solid centre-half. He was fairly quick and strong, was available for peanuts if you were in the English leagues, and always did a decent job at sort of League One or bottom end championship level. So a player that will really be a star for us in our first season there. David Ellabert is not great because one of the weird things you had in this FM, so you look at him, fantastic technically as a defender, but no mental attributes, no pace at all. And that was a theme of the Hamilton defensive side, and one of the other reasons Easton could become a star at centre-half. Ellabert, a young player with big potential, but no balance of attributes really. Mark McLaughlin, very much at the other end of the experience scale, but while being a good leader and a good defender, certainly better mentally overall. Not the best in terms of pace, a very similar problem to Ellabert, and very difficult for the way I'd want to play in the long term. Same for Chris Swales, who is 37. He's got no pace, although he is quicker than the other two. Not the best mentally, not the best defensively. He'll be moving on if we can do so, because both of those two are earning pretty big money. The big star, though, for the future for me, or the hidden gem, is James Gibson. Here's a left back who, not the best in the tackle at the moment, but he's got all the physical attributes, he's got all the defensive ones, and he's pretty good on the ball as well. I mean, in a modern day, be a great inverted fullback with these attributes, but not to be for the moment. Into midfield, though, we had the two stars that make this save popular and made it popular at the time, which are James McCarthy and James MacArthur, who we both know went on to become regulars in the Premier League. McCarthy, at the age of 17, an absolute gem. The first job with all of those young stars is extend their contracts to 5 years, make sure there's no release clauses, etc, etc. Needs a bit of work on a determination front, but as a player, got all the main minerals to make it. We've just got to hone those skills. There's also James MacArthur, who is the best one at the club. Little bit older at 20, a little bit more experience, and a little more rounded as a player. Mentally, very good across the board. Great on the ball, good vision, good possession, good technique. And also, despite not being the quickest or the strongest, plenty of stamina and natural fitness. A player who's going to be a star for the club. But then you've also got the third best player at the club, who is Alex Neil, who's obviously gone on to become an EFL manager regularly in recent seasons. He's the biggest earner at the club on paper. He's also a good midfielder, good on the ball, good in terms of stamina and fitness, very similar to James MacArthur actually, just not quite so strong mentally. And I think that is part of the problem for the short term at this club, and certainly the first season, which is with the three best players being centre midfielders, you either have to play James McCarthy out of position while he's developing, or you have to play three flat midfielders, because there's no one who's great in holding midfield or attacking midfield. You're literally playing a flat three, and that will change from the style we'd like to play, but looking at the rest of the squad, might work out anyway. The other midfielders are a pretty interesting one though, because Simon Menzin is actually the best defensively. He's not good on the ball, he can't really pass it, he's got no creativity, but he works his backside off, he's got the best character in the squad, he's good in a tackle, he's good in the air, he's a good shield in midfield. And for those of you who don't know the tactical side in the old FMs, I'll show you in a minute. The sliders and the arrows made a real impact on positioning on the pitch, so we could sort of navigate our way round. But again, that would then mean dropping one of the best three. On the wings, we had Mark Corcoran on the left, who is electric quick, good crosser of the ball. Not much else, but he's got the core attributes to get wide and get it in. No one on the right, which is something we'll be addressing in the window, with one other midfielder in Rocco Quinn, who can push forward as well. He can play naturally in centre mid, but also accomplished as a number 10 and a striker. And he's a player who, at 21 years of age, not bad at all. Not as good as the others, but still plenty for the future. Up front, an array of average players, so let me quickly show you some profiles. Kenny up front is a target man with not much else in terms of offering. Derek Lyle is a bit of an average all-rounder, not tall enough to make an impact in the air, not composed enough or quick enough to use his finishing attribute in behind, and not great off the ball. So bit of a mixed bag, and considering he's wanted, we'll probably move him on. Paul McGowan is going straight back to Celtic. He's on loan. And of all of the players in the squad, he's over double the highest earner because Alex Neil on £1,000 a week is the most of the permanents. He's on 2.1 and he's not even the best striker at the club. So that loan terminated immediately. And that frees up a lot of wages for a couple of signings. Then the final two are probably the best two. Joel Thomas, second best, not as quick, but got those target man attributes, got a little bit of potential. But at 21, not the finished products at all. But then the star boy is Richard Offiong, who I always liked in FM. He was quick, he was good in the finish, composed, good off the ball, loved a long shot as well. Joint biggest earner with Alex Neil, and he was always going to be a goal threat. So for season 1, we work around this man and make sure he gets us goals. 19 in the promotion season, 14 the year before. The boy's going to be a superstar. I've no doubt in that. So that's the squad we've got to work with. Let's show you the tactical side quickly, because this is what I mean about the old FMs. We used to have these sliders. So let's go and get the midfield 3 in and the 2 like this. But while you didn't have so many players in these FMs who were natural holding mids or natural attacking mids, you could sort of manipulate it a bit. So I was talking about Simon Mensing not being good on the ball, but being great defensively. Let's say I picked him in the middle of the 3. We would be able to then go into these sliders and say, no forward runs, no running with the ball, no through balls because you can't pass it, and the other stuff, don't do it too often. And that would essentially, if you go back to the tactic then, almost create a holding midfielder. So rather than having someone playing there, you've got someone who's naturally in a team a little further forward, but his mindset is to be there. So rather than having someone in the holding role and saying, drop in alongside the 2 centre-halves, which is what we see in the modern game a lot now, we're saying you're playing as 3 centre midfielders, but you're going to drop in and be an anchor man when you can be. We've got to make decisions, though, about whether we go for that as a more defensive setup or we go for Neil and MacArthur on the 2 sides, maybe not making forward runs or too many backwards ones, and then pushing McCarthy up in that middle role as a sort of number 10 position. But it's going to be interesting. It will depend on the transfer window. But as I've said, looking forward to a stint at Hamilton, this is what I had to embrace. This is the team I was working with. So what we're going to do now is skip ahead to the end of the first season, see how I've set up, see how we've gone about things, and see the transfer work that we've done and where we've ended up finishing, because the nostalgia trip is well and truly in full flow. So we return on the 17th of May 2009 with Hamilton. We have finished our season top of the bottom half, 7th place after the league split. We actually were in a bit of trouble for some time, but we managed to survive it in the end. The top 6 have still got to play their last game, but every position is settled already. Inverness were down a long time ago. That's going to have a big impact on our summer. But 51 points, a very narrow goal difference, and not that many draws. Very much the story of the season. But if you look at our overall record, I know it's easy when you get the split and you're playing the bottom half teams. We have actually won more games than anyone bar the top 3, and possibly Hearts, depending on their result on the final day. One of the things we have got to point out at this stage, though, is that because of the nature of Hamilton's young squad, it will have been improving throughout the season. So we started pretty slowly. We were actually probably the worst of the rest after Inverness at the sort of midway point. We've pulled away if people have improved, and towards the end of the season, we look like we've got a few gems, but there is a threat to our upcoming future, particularly with a summer transfer window. So overall, a very comfortable first season, but not enough to threaten Europe. We didn't do a huge amount in the Cups, if I'm being honest. If we get through to the fixtures, we've had a quarter-final in the Scottish Cup where we lost to Rangers. We got the League Cup third round where we lost narrowly away at Aberdeen. But we have had some decent results. If I get the goal scorers up for you, just so you can see. And there's been a lot of times where we've gone on a run without scoring. But a few big results in there, a few narrow defeats. And actually, if you look through the season in the league, not many times we've scored or conceded more than 2, which shows you that generally we're playing a slightly more defensive style, which has been enforced. But you can also see a few names there you won't recognise. So let's go over to the transfer screen and see what we've done throughout the season, because this has been pretty interesting. And the reason I say pretty interesting is because we've made a little bit of money, but we have also invested quite a bit too. Now, we struck a bit of gold with a couple of players early in the year. and a couple of signings we got, and a couple of players that were taken away from us for bigger sums than we expected. So let's start with the outs, because Chris Swales, the 37-year-old centre-half, he went to Morton for £10,000, where he's played 10 league games and been a staff member. We've loaned out a couple. Derek Lyle, one of them, he was then sold to Morton for 22 grand, where he's become a pretty decent player for them with 5 in 12. We then got a big offer from Crewe for David Ellibert, who was that young centre-half I mentioned, who he does have pretty big potential, but he's just not got the legs or the mentality for it. It's improved slightly, but not enough to have affected our team. But he's gone to Crewe, he's played in League One for a season, and he's done all right there, so you've got to give him credit. But we got 100 grand, which is a magnificent deal in that instance, and funded all of our summer work in the end. We mentioned that Derek Lyle then went permanently in January. Another loan for Jordan Love. Joel Thomas went out on loan to Partick. Didn't end up being a second striker because of a signing on the other side you may recognise. And then for 150 grand in January, Hibs came in for Rocco Quinn, who is a player with big potential. But it just didn't happen for him. While he was playing for us, let me get his history up. He just didn't perform. His average rating was 6.6. That was from 20 league appearances. And whenever he came into a game, he was a standout worst player. There was a spell where McCarthy got injured for about 8 weeks, and I thought, right, I'm going to give him a run regardless. And in the end, after about 4 or 5, I had to drop him out because he stood out like a sore thumb, and he shouldn't have been for his ability. In the end, we ended up with Mensing, Neal and McCarthy during that spell instead. So 150 grand seemed like a good way to cut our losses there. And that meant we had a bit of money to spend in both windows, and boy did we replace people. Because the first signing I got in the summer, yes, with a little bit of money on instalments, was Gary Irvin from St Johnstone. 26,000 overall, picked up an injury at the end of the year now, but he's been magnificent. 36 league appearances, 40 overall, 6.9 rating, just a solid right back. Had the long throw, which really helped us at times. Solid enough physically. Very versatile, could also play accomplished in holding and centre midfield, which gave us options when we needed them. And he's great defensively as well, which is really important for what we're trying to build. We had the flying young man James Gibson on the left, so to have him on the right definitely made an impact. The best we could find on the right of midfield, where we didn't have anyone to start off with, was Ian Flanagan. He came in for 55 grand, including future potential clauses from Kilmarnock. He's a decent player. He's probably going to be replaced next year. He's not as good as I would like to have there. But he is a player who has done a job for us this year. A 6.73 rating overall, 5 assists, 2 goals, broke into the Scotland 21s, which has kept his value up. He's a good player and will make back the money we've paid for him. But he's not great. He's not going to be that player that takes us to the top. But another young one. It was important for me that we generally got either very cheap players or younger ones who are going to make us more in the future. Paul Burns was more in the sort of cheaper realms. He was about 20 grand after all the fees, which we haven't met most of yet. Very hard worker, very average player. 1 start, 15 sub appearances. Has come on occasionally in centre mid, but has generally been the backup to Flanagan. He's a decent player, and to be honest, he probably won't be here in the long term. Might get another year as a backup, but for now, he was a player that was here to serve a purpose, and he's worth more than we got him for, which is all I can ask for. The biggest disaster of the first summer was Jason Marr, who I loaned him from Celtic and sent back literally 3 weeks later when we got a better permanent replacement. Just wasn't great, was moaning immediately that he wasn't playing. Not someone we were going to keep around. One that we did enjoy though was George McMullen, who came in from Northern Irish side Cliftonville for £7,000. Now, I did sign him because we didn't have a backup on the left of midfield, despite it not being his most natural position. The wide attacking midfield left, that is, I should say. But what he did have was incredible versatility, a low wage and decent core attributes. You can see it's featured in about half the games, mainly off the bench. And if you look at his positional wheel, good on the left of midfield, good at left back, good in centre mid, good up front. He was naturally a right midfielder, a position I think he might have played once. Yeah, look. 6 times he featured on the right, only 1 of those was from the start, and 14 times he featured off the left, 12 in the left of midfield, 1 up front, 1 in centre mid. Now, this counts any minute during a game, so if I was playing with an attacking left midfielder, then I dropped him to left mid to hang on for a 1-0, that will count as covering 2 positions. But the versatility there showed itself and how important it was. I really miss that graphic that shows that positional thing, and there probably is one in FM24, but just having it that easily accessible, something I really miss. The other graphic that I've really noticed since starting this save, you see this transfer screen with all the ins and outs, the transfer history. It actually flicks over when the transfer window opens. It's my biggest bugbear in FM. I've said it for a few years. I love to know from someone at SI why this changed. Because when we're doing our transfer specials now, we have to do all the transfers between when the window opens and when the season ticks over on the old screen, and you don't then get the accurate values that have been spent each season, whereas here it's perfect. One of my minor little complaints there. The final two signings of the summer, though, are names that you'll recognise from having good careers in real life. Lee Griffiths for Livingston for 35 grand. A young boy, was 17 when we got him. He's been the backup striker to Off-Young. He's got the pace, he's got the long shots, he's got the finishing. Basically, it was so he could keep the same style of tactic. And once we'd sold Elibert, we had a bit to get a couple in. So I thought, well, for the future, let's get ones like this. Lee Griffiths has scored 9 goals in 26 appearances. He's got an eye for goal. He's a good player. I know some of those were in lower league cup games, but for someone for the future, I think he's a gem. And of course, we know how good he can be from the real footballing world. Same applies to Sean Morrison, who he signed for 9 grand from Swindon. A big, bullying centre-half, again with a long throw. A 16 jumping reach, which has got him 2 goals in 16 appearances. Not the best at some of the stuff, but a solid enough defender. And when we lost Elibert, when we let Swales go, I thought, well, we're going to need one more. And once Jason Marr came in and threw his toys out the pram, I thought we could really do with a permanent one. This guy popped up. We knew him well. We know he's a great talent. So in he comes. And he's been a decent backup, to say the least. In January, we got one of my favourite pre-agreed transfers from FM09, a name that so many of you who managed in EFL, Scotland, wherever it was in Europe, at the non-elite clubs, will remember from this game. Miguel Rabosio. He was a famous Peruvian who was always available to get on a pre-contract for the 1st January. He's 32 years of age. He's declining a bit now. But even if we sell him in the summer, he's come in and served his purpose. I paid him the biggest wage at the club. He's made 19 appearances and done pretty well. But the fact that he's just declining in recent games, he's only 5'8", he's not the best in the air. If we can get better, I might move him on this summer. But to bring him in, to get a good half a season with him being the best defender at the club, and to then potentially get 30, 40, 50 grand for him, it really is a no-brainer, isn't it? Great business from the football club. And then we mentioned in January on deadline day, Rocco Quinn moved on to Hibs for 150 grand. We replaced him as a backup with Connor Rennie for 24 grand from Inverness, who is a decent young player. Again, 17 when we signed him. Bit of natural left-footed balance, which we needed in there. And again, has made a few appearances so far, as well as getting reserve football too. So, very much a focus on bringing down the average age of the squad, bringing in youth as our backup team, and knowing that we had enough talent in the first 11 to survive pretty comfortably. But before we finish off, let me show you some of the star improvers from this season, starting with a bit of news on the transfer front, because Thomas Cherney has agreed to sign for next summer. He is turning and joining the club after his loan. He had a really solid season and will be staying. But some of those young stars have really pushed on. I'm going to get the ones that are unavailable back in so you can see, because the man who's away injured is James Gibson, and he is about the best of the lot. He has developed massively on the defensive side and the technical side, still really good physically. Just a great player, and I am so sure he's going to become a star. We've managed to get most of these boys tied down to longer deals, and James Gibson, he's going to be here for the long haul, no doubt about that. A man who played left-back covering him the final day but has been centre-half for most of it is Brian Easton. You can see he's improved a bit defensively. You can see he's improved a bit across the board. Still got a little deficit in positioning and when it comes to jumping reach, but had a really good season, is worth a lot more money now, and is starting to get a lot of interest and attract it from other clubs. As are the two Jimmy Macks. We've got James MacArthur, who has improved beyond bounds. He has become an exceptional passer of the ball. He has become a linchpin of the team. 5 assists in the league, despite playing in a slightly more defensive role. And the stamina's improving too, as is the pace and strength. So physically getting better, now worth 1.5 million. I do worry we won't be able to keep him for much longer. And then James McCarthy, perhaps not such an impressive development initially, but he is only 18 years of age. Played the full season, started every single league game, 8 assists, 2 man of the match awards, And to be fair, a 6.9 rating and still a pretty marked attribute improvement certainly signals him as a star for the future. So overall, really thrilled with the first season. Richard Offiong was the star of the show. He got 17 goals in 33 starts, 16 in the league. Not improved or changed attribute wise, but worth £1 million and might well attract interest again. But otherwise, it was a pretty average season. Just looking at the star performers, Mensing did do really well. Enjoyed that holding role. McMullen was good off the bench, and Gary Irvin, someone who actually has been improving a bit as well. But overall, the stars were the young ones who have continued to improve and push on. Flanagan did struggle a bit on the right, but was a worthwhile signing regardless. So a solid first season at the club, and the finances were in pretty decent nick with the prize money about to come in, and I was getting excited thinking, well, can we improve some of the facilities at the club? Because if we go across and have a look at them, we get to the stadium and facilities. We'll get there in the end. We have got the opportunity to push the training facilities up to the same level as the youth ones, which are excellent. But I'm going to give you a little spoiler from the end of this season, because as I got through the next few days after the season finished, the board inexplicably decided to spend £3 million on undersoil heating, putting me in an insecure financial position and virtually irreparable debt. It also meant I couldn't offer new contracts to the star players who were attracting interest from elsewhere. And as we started to get bids, I've actually had to make a bit of a gamble and think with some of them, where they're backup players who I'd probably have liked to have kept, do I sell them early to stop some of my most prized assets being sold because we're in big financial danger? So it's going to be a very interesting summer. I'm going to try and keep the wage bill low because I feel that's a good way for us to get back on track. And ultimately, while we're not going to be able to make as much of an improvement as we like, if we can keep those star young players at the club and they keep improving at the same rate, we're going to have a good year this year, because the second half of the season, particularly after the league split against those bottom sides, I mean, we're unbeaten in our last 6 matches of the season. Okay, 2 of those were against Inverness. But the signs are there that we've got potential. And I might be able to do a little bit of clever business because of the failings of some other clubs, because one of the old favourites in FM was going back and signing players who got relegated from other clubs. Used to do it in England all the time if you switch divisions with someone. And while I'm not going to get too ahead of myself yet, and we'll find out in the next update whether they all come off or not, in a transfer centre, we've been looking at a couple of players from relegated Inverness. Andrew Barrowman, a striker, £2,000. Russell Duncan, a holding midfielder, £5,000, and a natural holding midfielder as well. That has the good attributes for it. So what I'm hoping for with that is that we're going to be able to take advantage of their financial situation and get in a couple of really good players on the cheap, because they're in an absolute mess after relegation. We've managed to get 50 grand for Trent McClenahan, which goes through soon. That is the first of my big sales this summer. We've got a 20% transfer clause for him. There are a few other ones that we've agreed for other clubs, but also that we're going to be due as well. 30% of the profit on Rocco Quinn could end up being one of the best of them. But ultimately, that's the plan for next season, is keep the star players if we can, and maybe get the biggest earners off the wage bill. Robosio probably has to go because of his age, because of his declining, and because of the fact that we're in financial danger now. Alex Neil, I'll try to move on because Mensing, McCarthy, all overtaken him. The likes of Rennie, a good player as well. Mark McLaughlin has agreed to go. He's the next biggest earner. And there's a few others further down who won't be staying. Kenny Duca is out of contract. McClenahan's moving on, etc., etc. So as long as we can keep hold of the big stars, we have got a real bit of potential for next season. I hope you did enjoy this nostalgic update though. My introduction to Hamilton and my first season with them. We'll probably be back in a couple of weeks' time with the Season 2 review. But if you want a little bit more detail about some of the key fixtures, some of the stuff we've done behind the scenes with staffing, because we have had some changes there, and some of the more in-depth player stuff during the season as well, then check out the blog page tomorrow. I'll put a link to it down below. We'll update that every Monday after we do one of these Sunday videos. For now though, if you did enjoy this one, a little Sunday evening nostalgia trip, then please do put a thumbs up on the video. Let me know if this is something you'd like to see more of in the future as well. It's something I have thought about for next year, where I've mentioned with house moves and that we might only be able to do one long-term save. Would you potentially like to see saves where we do maybe annual updates less frequently, just on the odd Sunday or whatever? Certainly I do an off-camera save every year, but never really have anywhere to update other than via the odd chat message in the Discord. So let me know if that's something you'd be interested in seeing in the future. And would you like to see stuff from other old FM games? I could work through each of Luton's conference years and see how we get on, and maybe find some of the star stories from each year, like we have here with Hamilton. But hopefully you enjoyed this one. If you want to stay up to date as normal service resumes from our FM24 long-term stories tomorrow, then subscribe and turn that notification bell on. Thank you to everyone who is supporting the channel as always. You really do make a difference. You can find a link to our FM24 playlists, our guides, our experiments, the Twitch channel and the football podcast, all in the eye above or description below. But thank you very much for being here. We'll see you tomorrow as the head coach returns. And then we'll be back soon in the future with another FM09 Hamilton Nostalgia Trip.